A Spartan soldier was born not to live, but to die. And their training system transformed children into the most ruthless fighting machines the ancient world had ever seen. But the question isn't how they fought. It's how one nation could completely control the minds and bodies of an entire population. This isn't a story about war. This is a story about control. About how a small society in ancient Greece created a perfect system, a system that no one could escape from. From birth to death, every Spartan soldier was locked inside a machine designed with terrifying precision. And the most horrifying part? It worked. Let's go back to 740 BC. Sparta wasn't a great empire. They were a small community, surrounded by other cities, other nations, enemies everywhere. They needed something to survive. They needed power. They needed control. And so, a man named Lycurgus had a radical idea. Rewrite the entire society, from beginning to end, from birth to death. But this wasn't simple legislation. No, this went deeper. This meant restructuring every aspect of human life. Lycurgus understood one thing. To create perfect warriors, you can't wait until they grow up. You have to start when they're babies. At birth, a male infant in Sparta was brought before the council of elders outside the dining hall. It wasn't his parents who decided if their child lived or died. No, a group of strangers did. If the baby looked healthy, strong, if there were no signs of weakness, the baby lived. If not, the baby was thrown into a deep pit called the Apothetae. This isn't a small historical detail. This is the foundation of the entire system. Sparta couldn't tolerate weakness. Sparta couldn't accept disability. So from the very first moment, anyone who didn't fit the mold was eliminated. The babies who survived? They were raised by state workers. Not their parents, someone else. Why? Because Sparta knew something other nations didn't. Love makes humans weak. Imagine you're a 7-year-old Spartan child. You no longer have your mother, or at least, your mother isn't allowed to care for you. Instead, you're placed in a group with other children. You learn to live, to play, to fight with the other kids your age, not with parents. Why does this matter? Because it breaks the bond. It breaks love. It creates loyalty to the group, to Sparta, instead of loyalty to family. But it gets worse. When you turn 7, you leave home completely. You're enrolled into military schools called the Agoge, a word meaning place of education. But this isn't a school. This is hell. In the Agoge, children were taught only 3 things: how to fight, how to obey orders, and how to endure pain. Food? Minimal. Spartan children were given a little rice, some vegetables, enough to survive, not enough to be comfortable. Why? Because it teaches you a lesson. Hunger is strength. Deprivation is strength. The ability to endure suffering is strength. Clothing? A single thin tunic, especially in winter. Teachers deliberately kept children cold and hungry. You see, that's a test. You have to learn how to live without comfort. And the nights? Children slept on mattresses made from grass they cut with their own hands. No pillows, no blankets. But the real horror wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was the violence. Spartan teachers, older brothers or designated trainers, found reasons to beat the children. Not to punish a specific action. No, they beat them to train them, to harden them, to turn them into machines. A weak child was beaten until it wasn't weak anymore. A child who cried was beaten until it stopped crying. A child who showed fear was beaten until fear disappeared from its face. And here's something extremely chilling. This violence was public. It happened in front of everyone. You had to watch your friends get beaten. You had to learn from it. You had to prepare for it to happen to you. But just beating wasn't enough. Sparta wanted to control your mind. Around puberty, Spartan children were taught to fight. Real fighting, not with swords, but with their fists. A sport called pankration, a mixture of boxing and wrestling. There were no rules. You could gouge eyes, tear ears, punch the face. The only goal was to make your opponent submit or destroy them. Children, yes, children, were encouraged to fight each other until blood ran, to prove they could endure, to prove they weren't afraid. And again, it was public. Adults watched, younger children watched. You weren't just a fighter, you were a performance. But there's an even darker aspect of the Agoge that history often doesn't talk about. Spartan girls weren't sent away. No, they stayed home, but they were trained almost as harshly. Why? Because Sparta needed girls to be strong. Physically strong, mentally strong. Why? Because strong girls gave birth to strong boys. That's it. Spartan girls were trained like warriors, not to fight, but to reproduce. Reproduction was seen as a military tactic. By around age 20, a Spartan soldier wasn't an ordinary young man. They were a machine, a creature with programmed reflexes. They knew how to endure pain. In fact, pain wasn't even pain to them anymore. They knew how to obey orders without thinking. They knew how to attack, how to defend, how to die fighting. And most importantly, they weren't afraid of death. Because everything they feared, suffering, loneliness, humiliation, had already happened to them. Death? Death was just rest. This is Sparta's strength. Not the strength of gold or silver. Not the strength of numbers or technology. It's the strength of mind. A mind that had been perfectly programmed. But let's pause for a moment. Can you imagine this? Imagine you're a 17-year-old in Sparta. You've never had a full meal. You've never slept on a soft bed. You've never been told, "I love you," by your parents. In fact, you barely know your parents. You only know pain. You only know cold. You only know fear. Or actually, you don't know fear, because fear has been taken from you. That's what the Agoge created. Something that's no longer quite human. A warrior. And when that warrior took the battlefield, what happened? Spartans fought in a way their enemies couldn't understand. They didn't run away. They didn't panic. They didn't ask for mercy. They stood firm, becoming a wall, becoming an immovable weight. In 480 BC, at Thermopylae, 300 Spartan soldiers stood against millions of Persian troops. 300. 1 million. And the Spartans? They fought until the very last one. They never ran. They never surrendered. They died there, on that hill, with swords in their hands. And when other soldiers heard about this, they understood. Sparta was different. Sparta couldn't be defeated because Sparta didn't fear death. But there was a price. A very real price. The Agoge system didn't create happy people. It didn't create creative people, thoughtful people, loving people. It created perfect fighting machines, but perfect fighting machines. A Spartan soldier couldn't adapt to peace. They didn't know how to live outside the context of battle. When Sparta began to weaken, when the wars ended, these warriors didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to build. They didn't know how to create. They only knew how to destroy. And many of them, very many, fell into depression. They lived long lives. They turned to alcohol. They turned to death. Why? Because they had been robbed of something fundamental, the chance to choose their own lives. Let's compare this to Athens, the other great Greek city. In Athens, children learned mathematics, They learned philosophy. They were encouraged to think, to question, to explore. They were taught how to live. In Sparta? No. In Sparta, you were taught how to die. And from a military perspective, Sparta had an advantage. In the short term, Sparta won battles. Sparta conquered territory. Sparta terrified its enemies. But in the long term, Athens flourished. Athens created philosophy that would survive thousands of years. Athens created science, art, thought. Sparta? Sparta created soldiers. And here's the real secret of the Spartan army. It's not a secret about strength. It's a secret about conditioning. About how a society can be completely rebuilt if it starts with children. The Agoge didn't create warriors who were born. It created warriors. It took a child, a being with infinite potential, and it dumped them into a special furnace until everything soft, everything weak, everything capable of being love was burned away. It's not magic. It's not genetics. It's a system. A system that will work on any child, anywhere, at any time. And that's why Spartan history is still terrifying to us today. Because it proves that, with discipline, with determination, with will, you can turn anyone into anything. So let's return to the original question. How could one nation completely control the minds and bodies of an entire population? The answer? By starting when they were children. But here's what I'm really curious about. If you know Sparta's secret, if you understand that this power came from training, not nature, what's to stop another society from trying the same thing? Actually, you don't have to look far. You can see this happening throughout history. Other armies, other regimes, they copied the Agoge model. They took Sparta's ideas and applied them. Because it works. It works in a terrifying way. And that's exactly why I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think understanding these dark historical systems helps us prevent them today? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment. If you want to learn more about how Spartan ideas shaped militaries throughout history, check out my next video. I'll show you how other nations copied this model and the horrifying consequences it led to. Thank you for watching. Subscribe so you don't miss any videos.